Good morning, my fellow treasure hunters. I thought I'd do a quick video this morning, and I'm headed out to look at some cache sites, a Jesse James cache site. I've got that video can come up for you later this week or beginning of next week. It's a really good one. We're in the process of solving a really interesting mystery on the Jesse James sites. Anyway, I'll update you on that another time. Today I'm going to post some video, a little bit older video from about a year ago of Dan Lowe and myself discussing some really interesting things. There are some really good nuggets of information in here for those that like to listen to conversations about Native American, the Spanish, and some treasure subjects. I titled this video Crossroads of the West because a lot of different information and history has come together in this area of Utah, and we've got the Grand Canyon that has made a barrier that for thousands of years has caused certain travel routes in the west and focuses travelers and explorers and miners and the Padres, the Spanish, the Conquistadores, the fur trappers. All these individuals and people have had to come through certain corridors, the Oregon Trail, the Old Spanish Trail, the Escalante route, the Nunez route. There's but the Grand Canyon has prevented easy or casual travelers from coming into this area for a long time, and so there is a lot of history that's tied up here in this area. One of the nuggets of information that's contained in this video is why Mel Fisher, the famed finder of the Atoshia, came to the Uinta Basin area and hired some people to help him look for some old mines. And we're gonna answer that question and a lot more information in this video. I'm just gonna post the video in two sections. It's about 30 minutes each. I'm just doing this brief introduction for video number 1, and then after that I may do a brief introduction before I post video number 2 tomorrow. But anyway, if you have any questions, please put it in the comments, and I'll be able to answer them as soon as I can. Anyway, thanks for your interest, and hope you have a great day. Okay. Well, today we're going to talk about some different things that are very interesting and informative, I hope. I'm here with Dan Lowe, up here in central Utah, north central Utah.
Okay.
The snowy section of Utah.
As long as that white stuff's out there.
Yeah. Well, one of the pressing questions that a lot of people have, Dan, is why is this area around Utah been called the Crossroads of the West? I mean, you know, from the history, the Oregon Trail, the California Trail, the trappers, the pioneers, the Mormons, the Spanish came in this way, even a little bit of the French. And we know that before that there was even older civilizations. And this area, whether it was because of the huge border of what's the term? The Grand Canyon was a huge feature that was difficult for people to cross. It was a barrier. And then you have the Wasatch Front and the Rocky Mountains coming down, which the Wasatch is a part of the tail of the Rockies, which go all the way into Colorado. But so there are certain features about the terrain that funnels people, groups of people, the Spanish, the pioneers, the settlers, to go certain ways. But there's another reason why people were coming here for thousands of years, and I'm going to let you.
Well, you first asked, why was this considered the crossroads? And the simple answer is, it's in the way. It's along the trail.
Right.
But I think what you're driving at is that the various topics of research that I and you have been involved in over the years, it seems to be showing, implying, insinuating that this area up around the Uintas, if you will, the Uinta Mountains, seems to be a target.
Yes, it does.
Everyone seems to be trying to get to and get control of that particular area. And you know, I could be wrong, but my personal opinion, it began as far back as 900 BC. And I think the latest incident of someone from the royal families over in Europe trying to gain control of it occurred as late as the early 1920s, 1930s.
Just for purposes, do you want to throw that name out, or
Which name?
that royal family that came here to that area?
Let me think about that.
Okay.
Because there's one individual that would take that and run with it because he thinks he's the descendant of this particular individual, which he absolutely is not.
Okay.
I will mention the first incident
Okay.
that I think, you know, I understand what's been written, and just because it's been written to me doesn't make it factual. In fact, it's reason for me to question it.
Right.
Okay. It's no secret that if you find something and the story somewhat gets leaked out as to where you found it, you're going to do everything you can to try to cover it up. And if someone goes after it and seeks after this thing that you have found, that you accidentally leaked something out about it, and another continent, country, world power, whatever, goes looking for this, if they get there first and they see evidences of previous occupation or claim to the land, they're going to try and cover it up.
Yeah. Yeah, we see that. We see that even today in international waters, for instance, when they find a sunken ship and Spain comes in and throws their claim on it, and the discoverer throws their claim on it, and pretty soon there's a big dispute. And
Well,
actually, if they can prove provenance, in a lot of cases, Spain gets a percentage of it.
I guess that could be used somewhat as an example, but I'll give you a very good one.
Right.
That history is familiar with, but they don't see it. When Cortez infiltrated the Aztec city, it seemed like an awful lot of attention went to the Spaniards destroying the Aztec records and the codexes and so forth, and the reasons for destroying them to me were feeble. They were offended. You know, these people, they're devil worshippers. Well, is this somehow changing the people and their belief structure because you're destroying their records? Maybe so they can't ever refer back to it. Well, Cortez wasn't destroying the records because he was offended by these seemingly devil-worshipping people. He was destroying the records because he knew that they contained information about who was there roughly 300 years prior. And it wasn't people from Spain. And so in order for Spain to lay claim, they had to make sure that this didn't come up.
Right.
You know, it's kind of like similar to the reasons as to why they're trying to hide the ancient city up in the Appalachian Mountains in Virginia.
Sure. And another thing that plays into this was they used the religion, the Catholic religion or whatever, as a cover for a lot of this, because they said these people were heathens, to be treated as such until they were converted to the church, and the only way they could convert them to the church is wipe out their old traditions. And so it kind of played into this framework of,
Yeah.
they did a lot of things in the name of religion that weren't particularly the name of religion.
You know, the funny thing is I asked one of my Mexican friends a while back. I asked him just to see what his answer would be. I said, you know, devout Catholic, and I asked him if a foreign power came into this continent now and forced upon you a religion, would you ever adhere to it? I mean, would you ever accept being forced into a religion? He said, oh, absolutely not. And I says, now, tell me how the Native American Mexican people became Catholic. And he looked dumbfounded, and his jaw dropped open, and he said, I never thought about that.
Yeah,
Well, what he never thought about was history.
yeah,
It gets dusted under the rug.
yeah. Well, one evidence that ties into this that's more modern, that's much more modern, and that we can mention because it's a fact of history. Any historian or researcher that has interest in these type of things can easily go get the information for themselves. And that is referring to the treasure hunter, Mel Fisher.
Okay.
And we know that for years and years, one of his key things was he was looking for the lost treasure ship, the Atoshia. And for some reason, when he finally did find that ship, and they started pulling things off of the ship, they found something that for some reason, after all the dust settled, and they had things under control there, a few years later, Mel Fisher personally came to Utah and hired a friend of ours, an old friend of ours, we can't mention his name, but to take him around to different areas for a purpose. And I'm going to let you tell the rest of the story. As Paul Hardy used
Well, yeah. Rewind. You know, Mel Fisher has gone down in history as finding the Atoshia, and as far as somebody jumping in the water and going down, looking around and finding it, yes, he did. But let's give a little bit of credit where credit's due. I can't remember whether they call him Professor or Dr. Lyons. In my book, he's the one that deserves the credit for actually finding it. It was basically, you know, Mel, you're looking in the wrong place, and here's why. And he explained it to him, and Mel, not being argumentative and trusting Mr. Lyons, he said, okay. So they went to look where Mr. Lyons said, and lo and behold, they found it. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, the Atoshia was what, mid-1600s, I think. And so, whatever information they may have found on that ship by way of writings that did survive is going to be 1600s. And according to the story, and I don't remember exactly where it surfaced, but I've had it verified by a few people who would know these things. Apparently, one of Mel's best kept secrets was that the contents of the Atoshia came from the Uinta Mountains. He knew that. In the barrel of one of the guns, sealed in wax, was a map. I don't know whether it was one of the so-called master maps, but it bared a similar resemblance to one based on one individual's testimony, the friend that you mentioned, whom Mel Fisher had hired as a guide to take him up into certain areas into the Uintas. He said that he didn't get a good look at the map, but he did see it, and he saw them when they rolled it out, and it was made of goat skin. And he actually said it kind of looked similar to your master map recreation. But he was told, or under the impression, I think they told him that they knew that the contents of the Atoshia had come from this area, including the emeralds. You know, and people the geologists, oh, emeralds in the Uintas. You know, emeralds are like gold. It's where you find it. Okay?
Right.
You can't tell, I mean, looking out there in those Uintas and saying there's no emeralds up in the Uintas is like looking up into space and saying there's no stars.
Yeah.
There's no life out there. We're the only ones. You know, emeralds can only come from one place. Yes, there is a certain set of circumstances geologically that emeralds are found in. I don't know the exact story, but I know that a particular geologist went up to a particular area and validated that all of the existing circumstances that you would find in geology are present in this place where emeralds were found.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is only one location. There's actually two that I know of where emeralds have been found in the Uintas. Mm-hmm. Now,
one thing I want.
Have I answered your question as far as Mel Fisher goes?
Well, I want to add a couple of things.
Or do you want to go deeper?
Well, I don't
into
want to go
time?
too much deeper because we do have some time constraints. But we do know that, like you said, that this map came out of a cannon barrel, which was sealed, and we know this is a fact. And we also know that they did find some of the things on the map. That the map was accurate enough that he was able to follow it back to the. And we need. I just want to mention here that in that time and day, the Spanish had to document where things came from for the king,
Right.
for the king's knowledge. Because if they were found to hide any information from the king, they could lose their life or their charter or
Their head.
their head at the very worst, or their support.
I would dare say that if it were possible to actually see that map, it's going to look very much like
Your
the
recreated
map.
master
Because
map, right?
see, what the people don't realize, there's some people out there, and I get why they do it. They get hung up on these 8.5 by 11 maps, you know, implying that. Have you ever noticed? You know, all these maps show up on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. Well, no, duh.
That happens to be.
That's the piece of paper that was available when you had to copy something.
Right.
They didn't have a Xerox machine. They didn't have scanners.
Yeah.
And by the way, Xerox and our typical scanners today are 8.5 by 11.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's common to see tracings of maps on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. No kidding.
Yeah. But we know they were on whatever size piece of
Yeah.
hide or parchment.
I mean, I've scanned old maps myself that I had to scan at least 4 different sections, but the end result, you could print it on a 8.5 by 11.
Right.
There's a few that you would have to put it on a legal form.
Right.
And one that I don't think, well, they actually do make paper to fit it because I get them professionally printed. And that's the Master Map Recreation. It's 52 inches wide and about 20 some odd inches high.
Right.
But anyway,
it's all right. It's also worth noting. It's also worth noting that a lot of the areas that they were looking for, that Mel was looking for on his map, ended up being in Indian land. And they had to go to the Utes for permission, and the terms that they were given were not good for exploration for financially, and so Mel backed away from that. And but they did find a few things that were off the Indian land that they were able to get permission from the Forest Service, and they found these old mines, and this buddy of ours actually went into a couple of them and verified that there were old heavily explored mines that were from
and unexplored tunnels.
But in other words, this great treasure from this Atoshia, it looks for all the world like it came out of the Uinta country.
Actually, they made it look like it came from Peru.
Well, yes, they did. The way the trails came down.
Or what, Panama?
Down in
anyway, somewhere down
South America. Yeah, well, that's where the trails that they used took them down to Mexico, and then from there the Gulf of Mexico up the coastline, and so the provenance, or where it came from, was difficult for anybody to ascertain. A lot of people thought it came out of New Mexico or Colorado, and some did.
Well, see, there's an awful lot of maps out there, okay? Not only the old Spanish maps, the old French maps, Portuguese, British. There's a lot of old maps out there of the West and Central America, South America. And I don't see the focus down south. I don't
No.
see it. Yes, there was a lot of things down there that they were going after. You've heard the stories of El Dorado.
Sure.
And one of these days we'll talk about that one, because I don't know why they can't find it.
Right.
I'm not saying I found it, but I'm saying I know where to look.
Right.
And if it's there, it's going to show up. You know, all you got to do is do a little bit of LiDAR surveys, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be a vast city show up in this particular place. But anyway, you don't see the focus down there.
Right.
The focus is always this lake, this mysterious lake that the slothful researcher will always identify as, oh, well, that's Utah Lake.
Right.
You see, they're not going to say Lake Bonneville, because history has told us that Lake Bonneville existed 14,000 years ago after the last ice age. You know,
right.
One wasn't enough. They have to create a second one. And it simply isn't true. This lake that I think visually anybody can see that this particular lake was indeed Lake Kapala. The problem is the academic world has put the date on it of 33 million years ago that this lake existed. And, you know, and you'll hear me talk about this all the time, and the reason I do it, it's because it's this focal point. It's an object, a geographical formation that they used to find their way back to a particular thing. The question is, what was that thing?
Right.
If it was just mining, okay, I could go with that, but there's much more to the story, parts of which I will never utter while a camera's looking at me.
Well, if you look at the more modern history, if you look at the time period from before and after Columbus, 1492, and you look at all the civilizations that existed in the western, southwestern United States, the Hopi, the Zuni, the Anasazi, the Fremont, the Pueblo, the basket makers, all these that anthropologists have identified as a group or a tribe, including the Navajos and the Apache and the Yaquis. If you look at all these things, if you look at where the centers of their civilizations existed, and ask yourself why, there's a certain other, aside from the Aztecs and the Toltecs and the Mayans down in far South America, it's like the breadbasket of history of these civilizations is right here in this area along the Grand Canyon corridor.
Well, I'm gonna let you all in on a little secret, okay? If you want to know what was historically important, whether it's been recorded or not, to the ancients, go where the petroglyphs are.
Exactly. That's right. The stories are there.
They didn't go wander off over into the Kesseldale area and carve a bunch of petroglyphs and paintings and say, oh, that looks good to me, and then they go back home.
Right.
You know, stayed away. They're there for a reason. There is meaning in it. I don't claim to understand it all. In fact, there's a very small part of it that I understand, and that's taken me 30 years to get.
Yeah.
And it's one of my little secrets as to why I can find some things that other people can't find.
Right.
And it's absolutely not a given science.
We know it's a truth that people don't usually, at least particularly ancient people that didn't have the same type of technology and travel and everything, they didn't venture very far from their homelands. the things that separated them from their homelands were war, famine, drought, mostly probably war or, disagreements or whatever that led to some of the dispersing of these peoples. But they still only went as far enough away to be safe from their relatives they were having a dispute with at the time.
Well, my favorites are the labels they put on them.
Right.
So that you'll stop asking questions, okay? So they come up with names like Puebloans,
Basket Maker 2.
Fremont,
Right.
Basket Makers,
Right.
and my favorite, Hunters Gatherers.
Yeah.
Oh, Iberians.
If you took a DNA sample of every one of these people,
You'll come up with mitochondria A, B, C, and D.
That's right.
Unless, of course, you're in the Northeast.
yep, with a little bit of variations showing some other things, but those are outside influences coming in rather than a great variation within.
Well, the bottom line is, if you've got a melting pot of 1,000 red crayons, and you throw in 100 white ones,
And a blue one.
it's still going to be red. Yeah, a few blue ones. It's still going to be red.
Yeah.
And, that may be a poor example because, hey, come on, I don't have a degree in, in fact, I don't have a degree in anything.
BS.
Yeah, I need to get a piece of paper and hang it up on the wall here and, maybe write something like,
Dan Lowe's BS degree.
I hereby certify myself as knowing something. And then I can, proudly display it on the wall.
Well, I'm very profoundly aware of the fact that people that have degrees, BS does stand for BS, and PhD is just piled higher and deeper.
I used to be pretty rough on those people over the years, but I've run into some pretty good people.
They are.
And I think it's because they understood going in that the first class that they've got to take is Brain Sucking 101.
Right.
And they were ready for it. And they are capable of thinking outside the box. We're seeing a shift, slow but sure.
Right.
But the people who are coming out of college now in some of these fields, and I won't say all of them, because some of them absolutely are stargazed at their professors. Oh my God, everything that comes out of this guy's mouth is gospel.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a group that's slowly rising up where they're capable of thinking outside the box. The problem they all have is it's a control system, okay? And the head of this control system is Smithsonian.
Right.
We see an excellent example of it out there in Lovelock, Nevada, where just because too many people were coming in and looking at these rather large skull heads.
The giant red-headed mummies.
The people at the museum were more than willing to show them if you asked.
Right.
But it reached a point shortly after a friend of mine went out there and took a picture of them sitting on the shelf. You remember the picture with the quarter, but that's the picture that he took, and it circulated all over the internet. Next thing you know, they were visited by a representative and said that if you show these skulls to anybody ever again, you're going to lose your funding.
Yeah.
That's called coercion.
Yeah.
It's a control system.
And I found that in my own, I was studying to be an anthropologist, and I discovered some critical mistakes that I discovered through directly confronting the situation, that they were purposefully made to satisfy a narrative, to satisfy the people that was providing their funding for them. And their funding would have shut off if they would have incorporated some of these other findings, because it would have taken them in another direction that they didn't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why became disenfranchised with that, because of the apparent dishonesty of a lot of academia, because of they have a narrative, that they're trying to follow through, because there's obviously a motive for the bigger picture. They're trying to hide a lot of things from society.
Well, I think it comes down to a few things. I think the things they're trying to hide is and I understand this sounds what's the word I'm looking for? Conspiracy theorist. Okay, who the hell come up with that term?
A government employee to protect his job.
Conspiracy theorist.
That's like a double negative.
It is kinda. I mean, no, history has absolutely no record of conspiracy, do they?
Right.
Yeah. See, when the people are all dead and gone, then they'll talk about it.
Right.
Okay, but as long as someone's still alive, who can be attached to it,
Right.
let's not talk about it. You know.
Yeah. That's how they control the narrative. But anyway, let's get back on the topic here of the. We're trying to tie it into Lake Kapala, which is known by a lot of people and researchers, and they put it in a certain area. But you believe that it's not in that area, and there's a lot of evidence that you've come up with in the creation of your master map to show.
Well, it doesn't take a genius. Okay, all you got to do is take the many maps by many cartographers. What were these cartographers thinking? Were they documenting what had been brought to them as evidences of things that were out there, and they're looking at it and they're going, well, we need to put a lake on here. Well, where did that come from? You know, if you study up on it, you know, it says the Native American people or the Aztecs probably told them about this mythical lake that obviously doesn't exist, you know. And why were all these cartographers putting this lake on their maps? I mean, you've got British map makers, you've got Welsh, French, Spanish. Every one of them's got their rendition of it, and they're mysteriously very similar.
Yep.
Except the ones that seems like they were just trying to hurry and make a map and get it on the market before sailing season came.
But you know, the science and historians will say, well, what happened is they took one map that was wrong and everybody made their maps off of it. But we have historical evidence that these people that made these maps, the British, the French, the Spanish, the German, actually were here themselves. So if they were actually here themselves, why would they need somebody else to steal somebody else's map?
So the more I'm noticing this, okay, I'm getting into the oldest maps. This one here, I can't remember the date on it, but the reason I like this one so much is because of the rendition of Kapala. Okay, and we'll insert an image, but I'll show you the results of this little project. You can very easily take today's maps or Google Earth and highlight the drainages so that you can see a good, fair perspective,
right,
and compare it to the map. There are known places on this map that you can also mark on Google Earth to give you a better perspective. Because let's face it, these guys weren't perfect. They didn't have Google Earth. They didn't have helicopters and satellite imagery and so forth. But some of them did a pretty damn good job.
Right.
The way the Gulf of California comes way up into Nevada, and on some of these maps where it shows California as an island,
right,
you know, these weren't mistakes.
Yeah.
These are from very early observations that date back prior, well, they date back to at least 100 BC.
When this land was very fertile, covered with the remnants of the
and
inland
geographically
sea.
looked very different.
Right. We have the Indians have a tradition about the time when one of these great waters, there was an earthquake and it all drained out and the big fish were laying all over the land.
Yeah, that'd be the Paiute legend.
Paiute
down
legend.
In the Cedar City area.
Yeah, talks about that, and I believe that that could very well be the time period. And if you go to the UNS today and you go to a certain elevation mark, I'm not going to say what elevation mark, and follow that around that valley, you will find remnants of fossils at that elevation all the way around.
6,000 feet.
That's right. And you will also find from dendrochronology, which is the study of tree ring data, that in that area where that lake was, you will only find really large trees that are fast growing. You're not going to find anything, and you get up above that elevation line and you will find trees that go back to the time period of that. But there's nothing existing
Right.
in that lake zone.
Something happened.
Something was there
Okay.
that prevented that.
This was once a very lush green tropical area.